The real blow of stopping sex after 60 isn't the lack of pleasure. It's realizing that your whole life you've been measuring your worth by someone else's desire. That's where people quietly break, when they realize they've spent decades needing someone to look at them with hunger to feel alive, to feel worthy, to believe they still matter. And then the anxiety shows up, the brutal comparisons, the guilt that eats at you from the inside, as if at this stage you still had something to prove in order to deserve love. Stay with me, Gabriel here. Welcome to the Stoic Garden. Today we're going to walk through 7 points, 7 unfiltered truths about what really happens when sex stops being the center of your life, and how to rebuild your intimacy, your dignity, and your peace of mind without begging for validation or living on your knees. And when you reach the final point, you'll understand that it was never your body that betrayed you. It was the way you chose your company, the way you treated yourself, and the belief that without desire you are worth nothing. Let's begin. 1. Accept the change and stop measuring your worth by desire. Because after a certain age, sex stops being a daily currency, and that's when it becomes clear who truly respected themselves and who only felt alive when someone looked at them with hunger. What changes after 60 isn't just the body. The entire stage changes. And if you keep judging yourself by the same rules you had at 30, you'll live like a retired player complaining that no one calls him onto the field anymore. Some people don't miss sex. They miss the confirmation. They miss feeling desired, chosen, important. And when that confirmation fades, they don't interpret it as a natural change. They experience it as humiliation. They start speaking harshly to themselves. They look in the mirror as if they're giving an account. They compare themselves with memories, with past partners, with older versions of themselves that no longer exist. And they punish themselves for not being able to keep playing a role that no longer fits. Life never asked your permission to change. And let me tell you something. Other people's desire was always unstable. You just used to be distracted. Before, it was enough that there was opportunity, that the body responded, that the circumstances helped. Now you get to see what was always there. Basing your worth on someone else's desire is like basing it on the weather. Today it's sunny, tomorrow it rains, and there you are, trembling, waiting for the world to confirm whether you are worthy or not. Stoicism doesn't get romantic about these things. It tells you to distinguish what you control from what you don't. You don't control your age. You don't control another person's desire. You don't control how your body responds each day. What you do control is your inner posture, your character, the way you treat yourself. That's the only thing that remains steady when everything else moves. And if that sounds cold to you, it's because you were used to living off stimulation, not foundation. In the middle of all this, a question appears that most people avoid because it burns their tongue. Since when does your dignity depend on whether someone wants you naked or not? Think about it calmly. Because if your answer is, since always, then what you lack isn't sex. What you lack is ground. You lack a root that doesn't break when a light goes out. Accepting change doesn't mean resigning yourself to a grey life. It means stopping the fight with reality so you can direct your energy toward what actually builds something. Cleanthes, one of the ancient Stoics, said it with brutal clarity when he spoke about following the course of nature. If you don't, you end up being dragged like a slave by what you should have accepted. And that's what happens to many people here. They're not living a new stage. They're punishing themselves for not being able to repeat an old one. There's something very liberating about admitting it. Maybe you're no longer the center of anyone's desire, and you are still a complete human being. Maybe the body changes, and you can still be attractive through your presence, your words, your character, your calm. Maybe sex decreases, and your life can still increase in peace, clarity, and autonomy. But that only happens when you stop asking the world to applaud you just to allow yourself to exist. And yes, I know, it sounds easy to say, but it's very concrete to practice. Every time you feel that sting of, I'm not worth anything anymore, stop right there. Don't chase it like a dog chasing a bone. Ask yourself what you're telling yourself and who taught you that standard. Because no one is born believing their worth comes from being desirable. That is learned, and what is learned can be unlearned. The change is already here. That part is not optional. What is optional is whether you will live it as a man who lost something or as someone who finally stopped begging for validation and started treating himself with respect. And when you make that shift, something curious happens. You don't become less human. You become freer, and that freedom is the foundation for everything that comes next. 2. Reorder your intimacy and learn to connect without sex. Because if your definition of intimacy is only frequency and performance, you're condemning half your life to a locked room. And no, not because sex is bad, but because you're leaving yourself without language. Real intimacy is a larger territory, and at this age it becomes more honest because it's no longer sustained by rush or by performance. Many people confuse intimacy with activity, as if being close were the same as doing something. So when the body doesn't cooperate, or the partner isn't there, or the energy isn't the same, everything shuts down. Two strangers end up sharing a roof, or one person carries a loneliness they don't know how to name. But what you lack is not the action. What you lack is the ability to be present without feeling insufficient. Reordering intimacy begins with something simple and for some people uncomfortable, learning to touch without an agenda, to look without demanding, to listen without turning every moment into an evaluation, to build small rituals that sustain connection. A coffee without screens, a walk, a conversation that isn't about negotiating who's to blame for what. That is also eros, it just doesn't come dressed in urgency. And if you don't have a partner, this still applies to you. Because intimacy isn't only about romantic relationships, intimacy is human connection. Having a friend you can talk to without performing. Having family you can be with without feeling you have to put on a show. Having the ability to share your life without wearing a mask. Many people reach this stage and discover that yes, they had sex, but they never had intimacy. And that's a blow to the ego, especially if you've always been an expert at looking strong. Epictetus, who was a slave before he became a teacher, said it with surgical precision. It's not events that disturb you, but the judgments you make about them. The absence of sex does not destroy you by itself. What destroys you is the judgment. Without this I am not loved. Without this I am worthless. Without this I will be abandoned. And of course, with that movie playing in your head, any silence feels like a verdict. In the middle of this learning, another question appears that you would do well to answer honestly. Are you looking for connection, or are you looking for anesthesia? Because some people miss sex the way they miss a strong drink, not for pleasure, but for escape. And when that route disappears, everything else is revealed. Loneliness, insecurity, the need to feel in control. That's when people become irritable, sarcastic in a bitter way, or turn to stone as if coldness were maturity. Learn to talk about it naturally, not as a judgment, not as drama, not as a complaint, simply as what it is, a human reality that changes. If you're with someone, speaking about it honestly prevents silence from turning it into resentment, and if you're alone, speaking about it with yourself respectfully prevents your mind from becoming your nighttime executioner. Intimacy is also the way you accompany yourself when no one else does. And watch out for a modern trap, comparing yourself with other people's fantasies, with exaggerated stories, with people who boast about an endless sex life as if it were a requirement for existence. That's like comparing yourself to edited photos and then wondering why you feel inadequate. Don't compete with fiction. Don't humiliate yourself in front of a screen. You're building a real life, with a real body, with good days and clumsy days like anyone else. When you reorder your intimacy, you are not giving up pleasure. You are expanding the territory. You are learning to connect through presence, tenderness, respect, humor, and complicity. And if sex returns, great. And if it doesn't return the way it once did, that's fine too. What matters is that you are no longer left without connection just because one form of connection has changed. That's where real maturity begins. 3. Face emotional loneliness and strengthen your emotional autonomy, because the problem is not being alone. The problem is not being able to stand yourself when you are alone. And that's where many people get scared after 60, not because of the absence of sex itself, but because the silence in the house finally lets them hear themselves without distractions. And what they hear is not always pleasant. Emotional loneliness is that strange feeling of being with someone and still feeling disconnected, or being alone and feeling that no one holds you up from within. Before, you covered it with activity, with work, with commitments, with the thrill of someone liking you, with the "I've still got it" that gave you a kind of certificate of relevance. Now, when that fades, the core remains. And if the core is emotional dependence, You'll notice it the way you notice a leak when the music stops. Some people grew used to love being a chase. Calling, insisting, giving in, tolerating things, swallowing discomfort, all just to avoid losing the person who gave them warmth. And of course, when the body changes or life changes, that strategy becomes ridiculous. Not because of bad intentions, but because it's childish. It's like at this age you're still begging for hugs the way someone begs for coins on a corner, only with better clothes and more pride. The hardest part of this stage is accepting that no one will fill a void that you keep enlarging yourself. That's why emotional autonomy doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming whole. It means learning to give yourself stability without depending on a message, a touch, or a confirmation. It means being able to love someone without turning them into your oxygen. Because when someone becomes your oxygen, it's not love. It's suffocation with decoration. And here in the middle of the road, you would do well to look at yourself honestly and ask an uncomfortable question. Do you want companionship, or do you want someone to save you from feeling alone with yourself? Because if what you're looking for is rescue, you will choose badly. You will accept crumbs. You will return to places where you are not treated well just because for a few hours they distract you from the internal noise. Strengthening your emotional autonomy is built through simple, consistent actions. Having routines that take care of you, not for productivity, but for dignity. Talking to someone for real, a friend, a sibling, a therapist if necessary, without acting as if everything were perfect. Allowing yourself to grieve what once was without turning it into a novel where you are the eternal victim. And yes, also learning to spend a quiet afternoon without needing constant entertainment, as if calm were a threat. This is not about shutting yourself off. It's about choosing relationships from choice, not from need. There is a huge difference between "I want you in my life" and "I need you so I don't collapse." Once you learn that difference, the way you relate to people changes. You stop chasing, you stop negotiating your dignity, you stop accepting company that only shows up when it benefits them. The sarcasm here is unavoidable, because sometimes you hear yourself thinking, at this age no one is going to love me, and it makes you want to tell yourself, with affection but firmness, you are not a yogurt with an expiration date. What expires is not you. What expires is the fantasy that love belongs only to those who meet a youthful standard. The truth is simpler. People want to be close to those who respect themselves, who have peace, who don't ask permission to exist. When you strengthen your emotional autonomy, even loneliness changes its flavor. It stops being a sentence and becomes space. A space where you organize yourself, where you listen to yourself, where you become the owner of your life. And from there, if someone arrives, you welcome them without kneeling. And if no one arrives, you don't collapse, because at last you have yourself. And that, even if it sounds basic, is something most people never learn to cultivate. 4. Take care of your body with discipline and protect your vital energy. Because when sex is no longer there to give you that hit of dopamine, your body starts billing you for how you treated it over the decades. And no, it isn't punishing you, it's showing you the result. The body doesn't argue, negotiate, or get emotional over your nostalgia. It simply responds to what you did and to what you failed to do. Many people reach this stage believing that energy is something you either have or don't have, as if it were a gift from fate. Then they're surprised to feel heavy, irritable, unmotivated, and they blame it on age, when in reality it's a lack of maintenance. It's like complaining that the car won't start when you never change the oil, yet somehow you still yell at the steering wheel with authority. Taking care of your body here is not about looks. It's about sovereignty. It's about being able to get up with a clearer mind, a steadier mood, deeper sleep. It's about protecting yourself from that feeling of slowly shutting down inside, which many people mistake for, "That's just how life is after 60. No. That's what life looks like after neglecting yourself for too long, and the difference matters because one is accepted and the other can be corrected. At this age, discipline is not heroism. It's basic life hygiene. Eating in a way that actually supports you, moving even when you don't feel like it, sleeping as if your peace depends on it because it does, walking with purpose, strengthening your legs and back, breathing better, drinking water like an adult and not like someone who only hydrates with coffee and complaints. Simple things, repeated, without drama, without creative excuses. And in the middle of that process, there's a question that puts you in your place. Do you really think you can live in peace if your body is exhausted, inflamed, tense, and you keep treating it like an old piece of furniture? The mind and body are not as separate as you wish they were. When the body declines, the mind becomes more anxious, sadder, more irritated. Then you say, "I just feel off." And no, you feel drained, which is not the same thing. Seneca, who was neither an athlete nor an influencer, spoke of temperance as a form of freedom. He lived it as a reminder not to become a slave to your impulses, your comfort, your excesses, and that idea fits perfectly here because the main enemy is not age, it's badly trained comfort. That voice telling you, "I'll start tomorrow," and tomorrow becomes the place where you store all your broken promises. Protecting your vital energy also means taking care of what you consume with your mind. Not just food, but also news, arguments, other people's drama, people who drain you. Some bodies recover, but some environments bleed you dry without ever touching you. If you spend your day tense, if you live in conflict, if you surround yourself with complaints, no walk is going to fix that. The body can endure a lot, but it is not infinite. And here's a useful truth. When you start taking care of yourself, you do not become boring. You become stable. And that stability gives you back something that sex sometimes disguised: presence. A steadier presence, a calmer gaze, an energy that doesn't depend on approval. And interestingly, when you recover that energy, you also recover a certain kind of attractiveness, but now you no longer need it as a crutch. You have it as a consequence. You are not late. You are still in time to be responsible with the only thing that stays with you until the end. Your body is not your enemy, it is your home. And if you make that home a worthy place, what comes next is lived with more calm, more clarity, and less fear. Because when you have energy, you stop negotiating with yourself, and at this age, that is real power. 5. Master your mind and disarm anxiety, guilt, and comparison. Because when sex becomes infrequent or disappears altogether, the mind starts speaking louder than the body. And if you don't train it, that mind turns into a cruel commentator, the kind that never helps, only points, exaggerates, and drags you into a movie where you always lose. Anxiety appears like an old reflex. What if I never feel anything again? What if no one desires me? What if I stay like this forever? As if life were an exam and you had run out of pencils. But anxiety is not insight, it is fear dressed up as thought. It paints extreme scenarios and then demands that you react as if they were already true. And of course you end up tense, irritable, looking for reassurance in the worst possible place, your own insecurity. Guilt is quieter and more poisonous, because it doesn't just say, "This changed." It says, "This changed and it is your fault." It accuses you for feeling desire, accuses you for not feeling it, accuses you for wanting companionship, accuses you for wanting peace. It is that inner judge who is never satisfied. And the tragic part is that many people obey it as if it were a real authority, when in truth it is only an echo of old ideas, inherited shame, and demands that no one ever signed you up for. And then there is comparison, the ego's favorite drug. You compare your present with your past, your body with other people's bodies, your life with stories that may not even be true. Let me tell you with affection, comparing your real life to someone else's fantasy is an elegant way of mistreating yourself. And if you spend all your time looking outward to decide whether you are okay, you already lost control before you even began. In the middle of all that noise, it helps to ask yourself one serious question without drama. Exactly who are you performing for? Because sometimes you act as if there were an invisible panel judging your masculinity, your femininity, your worth, your attractiveness, your relevance. And that panel does not exist. You created it and you keep feeding it. No one is chasing you with a clipboard. You are the one chasing yourself. Mastering the mind does not mean becoming cold or forcing yourself to stay positive. It means learning to observe your thoughts as events, not commands. There is a huge difference between the thought that I am worthless showed up and I am worthless. One is a cloud passing by, the other is a sentence. And when you begin to see that difference, you recover inner space. Space to breathe, to choose, to not react like a wounded child every time the memory of an empty bed knocks at your door. It also means learning to protect yourself from what ignites comparison. If you spend hours consuming content that sells you eternal youth, eternal sex, eternal bodies, of course your mind will feel deficient. Not because you are broken, but because you are feeding yourself poison through the eyes and then wondering why you feel bad. Do yourself a favor. Cut down the fuel for the noise. Choose what feeds your mind the same way you choose what feeds your body. And then comes the practical part, the part that actually changes things. Write a little at the end of the day, not as literature, but as mental cleaning. Name what you feel without decoration. Walk without headphones once in a while so you can hear your own breathing. Speak to yourself with respect, the way you would speak to someone you love. Because if your inner dialogue is abusive, no company will save you. You will carry your abuser with you everywhere. A trained mind does not eliminate sadness or erase nostalgia, but it puts them in their place. It allows them to exist without letting them rule. And when you achieve that, anxiety calms down, guilt loses power, and comparison becomes irrelevant. Not because you have defeated time, but because you stopped fighting shadows. And at this age, that calm is worth more than any applause. 6. Redefine pleasure and build a life with daily meaning. Because when pleasure is reduced to sex alone, the day becomes narrow, like a room with only one window. And if that window closes, you are left in the dark. But real pleasure was always broader than a single experience. The problem is that you got used to not seeing it. There is a kind of pleasure that no one brags about, but that sustains you. The pleasure of waking up and feeling that your day has shape, that there is something to care for, something to learn, something to move forward, even if it is small. People suffer more from a lack of meaning than from a lack of sex, because meaning gives you structure. And when you are grounded, the absence of one thing does not turn into total emptiness. Redefining pleasure also means making peace with simple things without calling them not enough. A good breakfast without rushing, a decent conversation, a walk in the sun, a shower that leaves your body feeling light, music that opens your chest, a book that keeps you company better than many people do. This is not cheap poetry. It is your nervous system coming home. And if you feel embarrassed finding pleasure in simple things, it is because you are trained to believe that only intensity counts. At this age, the most valuable pleasure is peace. And peace does not fall from the sky. It is built through habits and decisions that seem boring to impatient people. Organizing your space, your finances, your health, your relationships. Not because you become rigid, but because you stop living adrift. A life with daily meaning is not a perfect life. It is a directed life. And here is something people do not want to admit. Many chase pleasure because they cannot stand being with themselves. They need stimulation in order not to feel. But when you build meaning, pleasure stops being an escape and becomes a companion. You eat something delicious without using it to cover a void. You laugh without feeling guilty for being okay. You enjoy yourself without thinking punishment will come afterward. That is what maturity looks like, even if it does not sell as well. Building daily meaning also means creating something, however modest. A plant, a project, a skill, a craft, a care routine, a community activity, volunteer work, a class, a place where your presence contributes something. Because human beings become more human when they are useful, not when they are desired. And I do not mean useful in order to please others. I mean useful with dignity, knowing that your life touches the world in some way. And if you are in a relationship, this even improves the bond. Because when both people have their own sense of meaning, the relationship can breathe. They stop demanding that the other person be entertainment, salvation, medicine, therapy, all at once. And if there is no partner, this saves you from the trap of looking for just anyone to fill empty spaces. A meaningful day takes desperation away from you, and without desperation you choose better. It also changes how you see your body. You stop looking at it as a performance tool and start seeing it as a companion. You move it to feel alive, not to impress. You take care of it to have energy, not to gain approval. Pleasure stops depending on the mirror and starts depending on your inner experience. And that is a kind of freedom many people do not know even in their 20s. A life with daily meaning does not erase nostalgia, but it puts it into perspective. It reminds you that you are not here to live the way you used to. You are here to live well now. And living well is not about piling up intense moments. It is about sustaining a life that respects you day after day. When you do that, pleasure stops being something that slips away from you and becomes something that stays with you because you create it through the way you live. 7. Set boundaries, choose your company well, and preserve your dignity. Because at this stage, the greatest danger is not the lack of sex. It is being hungry for affection and ending up eating whatever is put in front of you. And I don't mean whatever in a moralistic sense. I mean those people who enter your life halfway, who use you for company when it suits them and disappear when you need something real. That is where peace is lost, not through solitude, but through bad choices. After 60, dignity becomes a filter, not an accessory. You are no longer here to tolerate games, to chase, to beg for messages, to accept a relationship where you offer presence and the other person offers excuses. And yes, it sounds harsh, but it is even harsher to watch yourself betray your own soul out of fear of being alone. The right people do not ask you to shrink in order to fit into their lives. Many people, when sex declines, confuse need with love. They get attached too quickly, tolerate small acts of disrespect, become too available, and then feel surprised when they are treated like an option. Of course, if you present yourself as an option, the world is not going to correct you out of compassion. A boundary is not a wall to isolate you. It is a door, and you decide who gets to walk through it. And this is where it helps to stop halfway down the road and ask yourself, without dressing it up, are you choosing company based on quality or based on panic? Because panic makes you negotiate what should never be negotiated. It makes you call something connection, when in reality it is just habit. It makes you say, well, at least, as if your life were a last-minute discount. Preserving your dignity means learning to say no calmly, even when people look at you strangely. No to lukewarm relationships, no to conversations that leave you drained, no to connections that only survive when you are the one pushing, and also no to your own inner urgencies, those that whisper that any contact is better than none. No, it isn't. Sometimes nothing is peace, and that is already a lot. The Stoics were very clear about this without ornament. Hecato of Rhodes, a teacher who insisted on the formation of character through concrete choices, left behind a line that hits like a mirror. Make every choice as if your character depended on it, because in fact it does. And that includes who gets access to you, who gets your time, who gets your intimacy, even if it is only the intimacy of an honest conversation. Choosing your company well also means choosing your social routines well. You do not need a life full of people. You need a life full of respect. Better 2 sincere conversations a week than 10 encounters where you perform, strain, justify yourself, and come home feeling lonelier than before. And if someone punishes you with silence because you do not obey their whims, that is not a loss. It is a cleanup. And yes, there will be people who tell you that setting boundaries makes you difficult, that at this age you should make the most of it and not be so demanding. How convenient. The expert always shows up when the goal is to get you to lower your guard. The truth is simple. At this age, being selective is not arrogance. It is emotional intelligence. You are no longer building a life to be liked. You are building a life that can hold you up. When you set boundaries and choose well, you recover something that does not depend on sex or company. Presence. A presence that does not beg, does not sell itself cheaply, does not break over rejection. And from there, if someone comes into your life, they arrive at a place that is already in order. And if no one comes, you remain whole. Because in the end, your dignity is not negotiable. It is your home, and you do not hand it over to just anyone. Getting to a stage of life with less sex after 60 does not take away your worth. It takes away your excuses. It forces you to stop measuring your dignity by someone else's desire, to understand intimacy as presence and connection, to support yourself emotionally without begging, to care for your body and your mind with discipline, and to build daily meaning so your life does not depend on a single source of pleasure. Now it is your turn to bring this into real life, not with big promises, but with small, steady decisions. Treat yourself like someone who deserves respect, even if today you do not feel at your best. Choose routines that give you energy. Choose thoughts that do not humiliate you. Choose relationships where you do not have to beg for a place. What you are building is not a stage that is without. It is a stage with more inner control. If this video helped you, subscribe and join me in this practice. And write in the comments the phrase, "I am Stoic," and while you're at it, tell me what country you're listening from so we can keep building a community of people who no longer settle for crumbs. Gabriel here. This is the Stoic Garden. On screen, you'll see 2 recommended videos so you can keep going deeper and keep refining your character with calm. Hold on to this. Your life does not go dark because one part changes. It lights up when you choose yourself with firmness.